Hi, I'm Dustin Lukey. Welcome to another edition of Hometown Conversations. We're working to bring together community members to speak freely and openly about ways we can all make real, lasting change in our community. We want to be a platform of education, understanding, and empathy. I want to welcome you all to another edition of Hometown Conversations. I'm joined today by Cody Green, a famous TikTok user who shares his story of mental health, and Judge Todd Bierke, who is the president of the National Alliance of Mental Illness local chapter covering La Crosse and Vernon County. So thank you both for being with us today to have this candid conversation on mental health. Cody, I want to start with you. Just give us a little overview of your story. You've got more than 1 million followers on TikTok for being open and honest about mental health. What has that, first of all, done for you? And I guess, what has the effect been for your mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting to watch it progress because I started just sharing my stories about developing schizophrenia and growing up with a mother who also had schizoaffective disorder. And I didn't really expect anything to come from it. And before you knew it, my page was constantly growing and people were excited because there was someone on a social media app who wasn't just dancing or who wasn't just doing comedy, but actually talking about things that I struggled with, whether it was mental health, my past of addiction, or even my past with incarceration. People were able to understand or relate in some way. And so for my personal mental health, it really gave me more confidence to be able to understand that this is something that I'll have to live with, but that I can manage, and also giving people the ability to realize they can also live normally and function with whatever it is they're dealing with.
Yeah, and with social media, a lot of times we see somewhat negative effects on people's mental health, the comments, I tend to think. How has that manifested itself for you, or how do you deal with that aspect of it?
Negative comments can be a really difficult part of social media, but an inevitable part of social media. It's something you're always going to have to deal with. So what I've done really well is recognizing that if comments are getting to me, that I need to take a break from social media. And it's something that I've done so frequently, my followers are used to. And it's something that when people ask me about getting into social media to start posting content, it's one of the pieces of advice I always give them is to take breaks when you need it.
Yeah, and to have that support group of folks who can help you. And with regard to support groups, Todd, I want to talk a little bit about NAMI locally, this organization that's working to destigmatize mental health and offer support. I guess give us a broad strokes overview of what people who may not know what you're doing, what's the work going on right now?
Well, NAMI, along with a lot of other organizations, are trying to destigmatize mental illness. That's a problem that we've been working on for hundreds of years, really. People that have a bodily injury, a broken arm or a lost leg or what have you, you can see their injury just plain as can be, and you can address it, fix it. Help them adapt with that injury, get them back to walking or what have you. But mental health, everybody seems to be really internalizing it and trying to hide it from others because they feel off. They'll often self-medicate to alleviate the symptoms, but they don't want to admit that they have a mental health issue because everybody looks at people with mental health issues differently, wrongly, assumes that that's just something they can fix, get over it. For NAMI and the other organizations I'm aware of are trying to destigmatize that because people need to know they're not alone, and they need to know that all they have to do is ask for or seek that help, and it's out there. And they don't have to suffer. They don't have to self-medicate. They can get themselves stabilized. A lot of times you can't cure these issues. In fact, most of the time you can't. But you can surely get the proper medication, the proper counseling, and interventions to get you to be able to deal with it and live a very healthy, fruitful life. And groups like NAMI are trying to do that. The problems we see is that it is so hard to get the message out there. People, develop mental illness so slowly sometimes that they don't feel the onset, so they don't know that there's something wrong with them, and they don't seek that help. And that's the point. Things like your program today, or to try to get that word out there. The article about Mr. Green in the paper yesterday is trying to get that out there and destigmatize this so people can reach out and get that help. NAMI has various support groups that they can refer people to, lots of different resources online that people can access to utilize on their own, but people need to actually take that step to avail themselves of those. Or perhaps people that are associated with those individuals can reach out and try to intervene and help get these folks the help they need.
Yeah, and getting the word out on social media too, like Codys doing. I got to imagine that is helping people be able to confront the things they're dealing with even more.
I think the biggest comments, the most meaningful comments I get are the people who say, I would not come to terms with my mental illness until I saw your page. And it's really interesting to be able to see people become more comfortable with what they're dealing with and reach out for help, all because they were able to understand that there's someone else out there struggling with it. I know when I was first diagnosed and when I first started showing symptoms, that was the one thing I wanted. And I actually did reach out to our local NAMI group right here in La Crosse. And so that was my first taste of like advocacy and being able to understand that I wasn't the only one struggling with mental illness. Even just in a small area like this, you just wouldn't expect so many other people to have these issues and be so open about talking about them and be willing to share their stories. And so NAMI peer support group specifically was kind of my introduction. It was the thing that made me willing to talk about mental health on a larger scale.
Yeah, and with regard to that, talking about your story a little bit, you've dealt with, you mentioned addiction issues. Was that with regard to the self-medicating?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had my psychotic break when I was about 19. It was my first year of college, and when I started developing auditory and visual hallucinations, I didn't know how to cope. Obviously, I grew up with a mother who had schizoaffective disorder, and like he had mentioned, I was not ready for that label. I didn't want there to be a label of schizophrenic or mentally ill because I saw how schizophrenia was portrayed on the illness and on TV shows. Even the way people would react to my mom when they found out that she had schizoaffective disorder was something that I wasn't willing to go through. So I went quite a long time just self-medicating and not getting the proper help I needed, which only made things much worse for me and also led to, as I mentioned, incarceration.
Yeah, and what was your experience dealing with the justice system, going through a mental illness as well?
At the time, because I wasn't willing to accept my mental illness, it wasn't really a factor in the justice system in terms of my case, because with my case, it was more about the actions that happened, and there wasn't an underlying cause that anyone was aware of. So it didn't really play it didn't play a huge role in the development of my case. It did play a role in my incarceration while I was in and after I got out, and wanting to change and do advocacy both for mental health awareness and for prison advocacy.
Yeah. And when, I guess, how do you deal with, as a circuit court judge, when you see somebody who may be struggling with mental health? Is that apparent, or is that something?
It is. I can see it. Most people that come in front of me, I can see or feel that there's some reason they're abusing substances. Sometimes it's because of an injury. I mean, they may get hooked to opiates and things like that. I'm on the overdose fatality review group and work with Alliance to Heal, and the doctors there talk about the major problem with overdoses is people going through the injury cycle rather than people self-medicating, but I think it's really part and parcel the same. But I don't think our criminal justice system is truly set to help people with the mental health issue. The county jail is the largest mental health facility in the county because of the people that we have in there. They're doing everything they can with programming and things to try to address the needs of their inmates, and that has changed dramatically over the years. But we get somebody like Cody that would come in front of us, and we do determine that there may be a mental health component, we would order that to be part of his probation, something to address. But the problem is, it takes months to get into your first appointment. That's a problem in our community. We don't have enough providers. We don't have enough safe places they can go to try to address the substance use, along with trying to stabilize the mental health component underneath that. And that's where we get the people that sometimes keep coming back through the system repeatedly until they get to the point where they truly decide they want to address that mental health component. I agree with Mr. Green about labeling. I think labeling is a very negative effect for people to have to endure, that you have a mental health issue, that you're a convict, as he describes himself. You're on probation, you have prior convictions, what have you. But every time someone comes in front of me, I try to talk with them to try to get them to see the issues that brought them there and to make sure they try to address it going forward, because I have a very short time with them. But the probation officer will have longer periods. Others that may work with them may have longer periods, but that's really our downfall. And I think society has to look at mental health as being something more prevalent that can properly be addressed at almost any age level. I mean, even young people are suffering from that. And do it because you need to do it. Because these people will be different if they're treated appropriately and have their issues addressed. And I think that'll lower the criminal justice system's involvement with people quite a bit, and people will go to the right place rather than perhaps jail or probation.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. It seems to me just the biggest thing we need to do is sort of change the conversation, to be able to have these conversations more openly, but also not just say, you're suffering from this mental illness. I'm going to, compartmentalize in my mind where you are. So I guess how do we make that shift? Do either of you have any ideas?
I think it's really important for us to be having conversations like this constantly, because all it does is give people the opportunity to express their needs in the community and also their needs when it goes through every part of health and every part of health when it comes to, specifically with mental health, having providers in the area, having resources like NAMI, having people they can reach out to. I know when I first struggled with coming to terms with what I was dealing with, I reached out and I said, I'm ready to see a psychiatrist. And like he mentioned, it was 2 to 3 months before I finally got in. And in that amount of time, you have all these thoughts of, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe the people around me are right, and I don't actually have anything wrong with me. And so I think it's really important for us to have open conversations about mental health, what it looks like, the hidden symptoms that we might just think of people being overdramatic. I know I've gotten so many negative comments specifically about whether or not I am in a serious point of my mental illness, because I'm pretty high functioning at this point. But what people don't see was the point where I was abusing drugs and reaching out and not getting anyone reaching back out to me. And all that does is lead to the downhill spiral that led to, more addiction and incarceration.
So how do we keep that going, do you think, Judge Bianchi?
Well, people like you need to keep finding people to talk about it, to get it out there. NAMI's looking at trying to do some sort of advertising. That costs money. But, are people going to even look at that? When usually you have speakers present, the people that come are the ones that really don't need the message. So how do you get the message to the people that need it or don't think they need it but really do? And that's where the problem lies. We need to unstigmatize mental health and make it a mainstay of our society, because so many people have issues with it. I'm on a group called the Campaign to Change Direction, and Channel 19 has worked with us on that. They started out a few years ago trying to identify the 5 signs of mental illness, but they've morphed into looking at the signs of mental well-being. I'm on a state task force for attorney well-being. So they're trying to change the focus from addressing mental illness at the far end, when people finally are ready to go in, and try to affect people up front and make a lifestyle they can have where they can maintain good well-being, and when they're struggling, address it then when it's much more manageable. When people abuse drugs as self-medication, that changes your brain. And those people, when they get to a certain point, are going to need those drugs just like you and I need to breathe right now. How do you stop someone from breathing, right? So it's a really hard process to get people off of the drugs and also to address their mental health, to keep them stabilized. And as Mr. Green said, people feel good and oftentimes they go off their medications and that just screws them back up again. Or they may go out and party and maybe have some alcohol or some other drugs that really affect the medication's efficacy, and that screws them up. And then they go back into that spiral again, and it's hard to get them out. And that's what the people of the society see when they are at their worst, coming through the criminal justice system. So there's a lot that can be done, but it does involve persistent communication and conversations to get that word out, and hopefully have people to try to address it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm hearing a lot of talk about the treatment like it were a physical health issue. But with physical health issues, we often see like when somebody injures a leg, for instance, and then the issue of dependency can go from there. But with a mental illness, you mentioned it's slow developing. Was that, Cody, for you, your experience, was there ever a point where it was just like, this is something wrong, or was it that slow development?
I think it's a little bit of both. While mental illness is manifesting and developing, there are times where I think you recognize it and choose not to see it because of stigma built up around it. That was my case specifically, where I had a mother who was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I knew what those labels looked like, and so even though I could see symptoms here and there developing, I chose not to recognize it. I chose to look past it as maybe just something that I was dealing with temporarily. I do think that a lot of people will ignore symptoms that they know are signs of depression or anxiety or even schizophrenia. And without it being something really noticeable, it's really hard for other people to acknowledge it. People can always tell when someone's struggling with something mentally, but it's a tough thing to bring up. And this is something even I know as a mental health advocate. I regularly deal with people that are struggling with addiction and mental illness, and even I can't just go up to someone and say, hey, I think you might be having symptoms of schizophrenia. It's something that you want to be able to educate people about, but you also want them to come to terms with it on their own. Because if they can see a video that I did or another mental health creator did and think, these are symptoms I have, this is something that I might be struggling with, they're more likely to go get help than if they were someone like me who knew the symptoms but wasn't ready to go get help because I felt like the people who did recognize it were forcing it on me. And so I ignored it until it got to a point where it was too far gone. And at that point, I fell into the justice system. And from there, it's just really difficult spiral.
But you are proof, though, that people who do go through that can come back from it.
Absolutely. Treatment and medication are another thing that are stigmatized. Medication and treatment, we see in this society, people react to you taking medication or going through treatment as a weakness. And that can lead to that growing stigma around mental health and people not wanting to get help. Especially like men have really high suicide rates because we're taught that we're not supposed to show these feelings. And so it's just another way that we can improve when it comes to basic mental health, including anxiety, depression, and suicidal tendencies.
Getting to the point where maybe it's not somebody who's watching this is going through themselves, but they know somebody who might be struggling with something that might be mental illness. How do you be there as a friend, as an ally for them, without making them feel worse about what they're going through?
I think that's a really tough conversation to have with someone. The best thing I can recommend, and I recommend the same thing for people struggling with addiction, is be there for them, let them know that you're concerned, but allow them to reach out and allow them to be the first ones to say, I am ready to accept help, because very rarely does forcing someone to go to the hospital or forcing someone to get help, work out. They have to really want to do it themselves. But that doesn't mean you can't plant the seed and let them know that you're worried and that you think they may be struggling.
Yeah. And with NAMI, is there a way to, are there resources for those who might know somebody who's struggling too?
There are, and NAMI has groups where family members can come and learn things so they can go back and do as Mr. Green just indicated and try to be there for that struggling person until that person is ready to take responsibility for their own life. And it's really hard to do that. When I see people in court, they're given the opportunity. I tell them that you're no different than all these other people that have been able to pull themselves up and address the issues that are that brought them into the court system. You're no different, and they were able to prevail. No matter what treatment you get, we can't change you. Only you can change yourself. You have to come to that realization that you need that help and you want to change, and you'll avail yourself of the help out there. And as said, people don't want to ask for that help. Once they get over that hurdle, things start to become a little bit easier, knowing that they can rely on others when they are down and need that lift to get out there and address their needs. But I run a veterans treatment court, and as you said, people going to treatment voluntarily, they can walk away voluntarily if they don't want it. I know a lot of people have gone in and out of treatment over the years and haven't made any change in their life. But treatment courts are coercive treatment options. The people are there on probation and they know they could go to prison if they don't complete it. And with that, sometimes you can work with folks and get them to get past that until they've had a long enough sobriety period and are starting to actually address their mental health issues. And then at that point, it does start to become more voluntary on that point, on their part, to maintain that lifestyle they're starting to achieve. So the treatment courts have had a lot of people that have graduated that have been able to maintain that life. It's still hard, but they still have a lot of people that will end up loosening up on what they need to do, and they'll have those relapses and mental health breakdowns and resort back into that despair that we tried to get them out of. So it is really hard. But you have to be there for people and motivate them the best you can to get into some place where they can get that help.
Now, the treatment courts have been seen as a model around the state from what I can tell, our treatment courts locally. You mentioned some other changes you'd like to see with the criminal justice system to make it better for people with mental illness. What are some of those?
Well, some of those are ongoing right now. We have something called the Lighthouse Project, where we're going to take people with mental health issues and or substance abuse issues that are going to be able to stay there for a short period until they can get referred into a proper place, sort of safe house, peer-run respite center. Chief Kudrun with the City of La Crosse Police Department has developed a team that when there's a call and mental health is a component of that call, the team will go out and they're trained to go beyond what the officers are trained on for crisis intervention and be able to deal with those people in a much more effective way.
Having specialists with
them.
Yeah,
and hopefully get them to the proper place rather than allowing that situation to develop where an officer may be hurt or something else happens, then you have to end up arresting the person. So, I mean, there's things like that going on in our community, ways to address substance abuse. They're trying to elevate to take care of those things. And I think that, if the legislator for our state would look at developing some ways by which we can better address some of the needs of our citizens, I think that'll help. If you're truly in a mental health crisis, the judges can commit people and they get that treatment for whatever length it needs for that commitment. If you don't fit that mold, but you're doing some criminal activity, then you go straight to the criminal side and they deal with you that way with probation. But there's that big gap in the middle that we need to fill with proper resources, proper dollars to address these issues. And there's so many people that could fit in there, plus hopefully the well-being side before you get to that mental health crisis. So those two areas really need to be bolstered big time.
And where does change like that start? Like, how can people get the ball rolling on something?
Well, we talked to our legislators. I think our legislators here are pretty sympathetic to it. You mentioned the school district. Aaron Engel for the La Crosse School District is actually on the NAMI board, and he has a strong desire to address mental health issues from that standpoint. I know the hospitals are trying to work on that. We have someone from Gunderson on our NAMI board, and others are involved in other groups, and people just need to keep reaching out there and keep talking about it and keep trying to destigmatize this and show that people with mental health issues don't need to hide that. They need to address it and become productive and healthy in our society.
Right, be out there in a very, very public way in some regards. Cody, do you have any questions for Todd about the criminal justice system?
Specifically in this area, I think we are making really good strides in addiction recovery and mental health. There aren't any questions necessarily I have. I just want to continue to see that progression. I think that change is being made within both the justice system here, the police system. I've been asked to speak with several different police departments about how they think they should react to mental health encounters, and so hearing that even La Crosse County is kind of taking those first steps, it just shows that we are really progressing in the right direction with regards to addiction and mental health, which are both, rather big issues here, specifically in La Crosse and even in Vernon County as well. I would just like to see that continue and be able to see people who are able to make those changes be able to effectively do that with, like he said, the funding and the means necessary, because I think that's what it comes down to, is we all have these ideas of what would help, but if there's a lack of funding, if there's a lack of support, then we're not able to see these changes being made.
Yeah. You did mention suicide in September being National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Mental health, again, it's so much living in your head. People can't see the outward effect. So I guess suicide is something that's personal to me. I had a friend years ago who lost his battle with addiction and had gone through the court system. So I guess what are the ways people can try to normalize that? It's not an easy conversation. I know we've talked about it a lot, but to normalize being able to talk about it when you're feeling that low.
Suicide prevention awareness is probably the most difficult thing to talk about, because so many people have been affected by it, whether personally or whether they know someone who lost their life due to suicide. It's one of those things that even on social media, it's very difficult to talk about, because I've had videos removed for talking about stories regarding points in my life where I was delusional and had suicidal tendencies. And so the best thing we can do is recognize that people with suicidal tendencies aren't going to make that decision based on conversation, which some people think is true. They think if we talk about it, it'll give those people ideas. And I was trained in suicide prevention, and as someone who struggled with it personally, if someone's having those thoughts, having a conversation about it isn't going to lead them to it. If anything, it gives them the insight to realize it's something that we can talk about and have a conversation about before they do take that action that they can never undo.
Well, the problem with suicide prevention is a lot of people are hiding their mental illness, and you don't know until they've done it sometimes. But the people that are talking about it, developing a plan, you can see it, you can see their despair, then you do have to reach out and you do have to talk with those folks. But again, so many people can look like they're leading a normal life, having all these mental health issues. A lot of times, a good work facility will keep you so active that you can sort of suppress the issues. One of our veterans we worked with was in Vietnam. He got out and he had a long-term employment, 30 plus years out of Fort McCoy. And once he retired, that's when the problems from Vietnam arose and he started to have domestic issues. But he had suppressed it all those years. It was always there. So some people are like that. Some people, it may never manifest until they decide to commit suicide. You may not see anything. And those are so hard. But when you understand a person's background, you can sometimes assume that there's going to be issues. Anytime I see someone come in my court that I know is in combat, I know there's issues there. I don't know what they are per se. I can kind of guess, but I have a feeling that they're in my courtroom because of those issues. And I'm going to want to address those somehow when I want to change behaviors in that person going forward. So if you have family members that you know are in situations where PTSD can develop or other things are underlying it, those are people just to have conversations with in a general way. But again, when they have a plan or they're talking about it, you have to have that conversation regardless, or you'll regret not having it down the road.
Yeah.
But it is hard.
Yeah. It really sounds like bottom line is more talk, less labels. I think as a way to at least start to move forward with recognizing mental health, understanding mental health, and allowing people to come forward, like you said, Cody, just to give them that platform. Are there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave anybody with? I feel like we've covered a wide breadth of topics and all with the same theme of mental health, but is there anything you'd like to leave people with?
I would like to see more people sharing their stories. So if mental health is something you personally struggle with, I love to see people reach out to me and say, hey, because of you, I started sharing my story on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. And being able to share your story kind of gives you the power back from what mental illness has taken away from you. When I started sharing my story, I recognized that it no longer controlled my life. And I think for people to be able to start sharing their stories, it can lead to healing and it can prevent a lot of the, worst parts of what we discussed today.
I agree with that. You can see somebody that's totally functioning and you find out that they had that past that they dealt with, and you can say, well, that's how I feel, and I would like to be totally functioning like that person looks. And it does give that hope that people can change. But too many people have their blinders on and they don't look out there to realize that there's hope for them. And as you said earlier, mental illness can slowly build and build until you get to a point where it's really taken a hold of you, and you either have to do something or your actions are going to be inappropriate, or it could be something quick like PTSD that happens almost instantaneously and you're dealing with it. And you can feel that difference right then and there. But that's no different than an internal physical ailment that grows over time, ulcers or cancer or things, and you're just not sure why you're feeling bad. You need to act on that. So whether it's your mind or your body, people that don't take those steps end up at a point where it may be too late. And they commit suicide or they can't revert back. So people need to talk about it. They need to destigmatize, they need to get rid of the labels, and they need just to address their lives to make them the best they can be.
Act on it. It's not weakness, it's strength. You're fighting it. Just like we talk about people, I like that kind of allusion to people fighting cancer. We talk about them as fighters, and people, I think, battling mental illness, we need to look at as fighters as well. So I want to thank you both, Cody, Todd, for being with us.
Well, thanks for having us. Again, it's very important to get that message out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.